all means to use the chat and use it as much as you want, and we will try to answer as many questions and get back to kind of track the chat as much as we can. We are recording, and it won't be distributed widely. It'll just be for troublers who can't be here today. And there is closed captioning available. And let me also, I just want to do a little bit of a shout out here. Judy Jones, who usually co-facilitates these meetings, has been having some pretty intensive surgery this month. And ended up back in the hospital for a little while. So we're going to send a whole lot of love to her. We have a few other troublers who have had surgery this month. Diana Anhalt, Pam Wishay, Rod just broke his poor elbow. I am in Seattle with a kind of an ill sister, and so I'm aware that there's a lot going on, and we are just sending love out to everybody. Tara Doyle, you might have to unmute yourself.
Also, Eve Poling fell.
Oh,
was
okay.
Was hospitalized.
Okay.
She and Clark are now living in Montclair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So lots of love to all of those folks. Let me share my screen and go over the agenda. And as always, huge gratitude to Mary Lou McCloskey for helping us do the PowerPoint. So as always, this is a pretty full agenda. We're going to start by hearing a lot about the redistricting that's going to be happening this year. We'll be hearing from our partners at Fair Districts Georgia. We'll then be hearing about rank ordered voting from folks at Better Ballot Georgia. We are really grateful to them for joining us to talk about that. We'll be having some breakouts that are really just about connecting. We'll be hearing about the Gwinnett Parent Coalition to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. We'll be talking about work group updates, and then we'll be wrapping up. So as usual, it's a pretty full agenda. Super happy to have everybody here, and we'll do our best. Again, we may, let me say this in advance, we may not have time for every question that gets asked, but we will try to track the questions in the chat, and I'm going to ask all the presenters to keep an eye on the chat so that if there are questions we don't get to when you're presenting, that we can still get that answered. And so for starters, Redistricting 2021. And let me just remind folks who don't know that Fair Districts Georgia is actually very much a sister organization of Necessary Trouble, and it's the days of its very beginnings actually were a troubler work group, and now it is a robust 501c4 that is burning it up, especially this year, doing an amazing job. And we're going to be hearing from 3 folks who are both Necessary Trouble members and also on the board of Fair Districts Georgia, Mary Lou McCloskey, Karen Davenport, and Karen McCowan. So lots of gratitude to them and to all the troublers who are also in Fair Districts. And I'm going to turn it over. Mary Lou, am I turning it over to you? You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, Mary Lou is in charge here of going through the slides.
Are you ready, beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys so much for allowing us to share some information with you about gerrymandering and redistricting in Georgia 2021. Mary Lou and Karen McGowan and myself are excited to share some information with you. Briefly, let me tell you that Fair Districts Georgia is a nonpartisan group. I think the key word here is nonpartisan. We're not trying to elect one party over another. We just want to level the playing field. We are focusing on having maps that should not discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, political affiliation, etc. And our process in the long run, we need legislation to make a fair process work, no matter which party has the majority. If you see at the bottom, Georgia is now a swing state, and we feel strongly our legislative and congressional districts should reflect this new reality. And that's what we're working on for. Next, go ahead. So we're going to answer quickly 4 questions today. What is redistricting and how does it affect our elections? What to expect in 2021? A review of what gerrymandering is, because I know many of you have probably know a little bit about gerrymandering. And 4, how can you really kind of get involved in terms of what we're trying to do in 2021? If you look carefully at this map illustrates a Georgia Democratic gerrymander from the 2001 redistricting. And if you look in 2001, the priority was to retain Democratic majorities. One way to do so was to reduce Black concentration in districts thought secure for African-American legislators and to redistribute excess Black voters to help elect white Democrats. So next slide. Next slide, Mary Lou.
I'm just got stuck here. Okay, got it.
Okay, so the first question, let's look at question 1. What is redistricting and how does it affect our elections? So first of all, it's important to remember that the census happens every so often. Next slide. In the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 mandates that the country conduct a count of its population every 10 years. The 2020 census marked the 24th time that the country has counted its population, and the first time was in 1790. Each home received an invitation to respond to a short questionnaire online, on the phone, or by mail. And this is the first time that everyone could respond to the census online. Now, the census provides critical information that lawmakers, business owners, teachers, and many other people use to provide daily services, products, and support for individuals and to aid the communities. Next slide. So when we think about what is redistricting, of course, it's to maintain the same number of people in each district. The goal is to have one person, one vote. After each census, lines are redrawn. If you look today in Georgia, the legislator draws the line. The majority party controls the process. And these maps that are shown on here kind of outline what the districts look like now. All right, next slide. So when we think about what the districts should be, ideal districts are contiguous, that's required by the Georgia Constitution. And when we say contiguous, we mean that each district must share a common touching border. Generally, another requirement is that the districts be as compact as possible. And that means closely and neatly packed together, or actually having them be dense. We want to keeping precincts intact, keeping counties together if possible, following natural borders. Following these parameters helps districts to be connected so legislators can actually represent a group of citizens that are geographically connected. All of these items help districts to represent its citizens. Now, the way that our districts are currently drawn really don't make it easy for legislators to serve the needs of their citizens or citizen groups. Next slide. So let's look at question number 2. What is redistricting and how does it affect our elections? Next slide. All right, so if we look at this timeline, this is a timeline for this year, and there's some key dates on there. September 30th, the census data will be released. And late in 2021, the maps will be released. So communities really need to work together to prepare local input to legislators and committees during the spring or summer of this year, 2021. Things could move pretty rapidly since once September 30th census data are available. And David Rawson, the speaker, has suggested that maps will probably be developed when the frost is on the pumpkin. So we just really need to be aware of these dates so that we are able to quickly pull together and provide local input to whatever they come up with the maps. Next slide. So if you look at this slide here, that talks pretty much about the big population changes that are going to impact the 2021 redistricting. Georgia's population has grown about 10%, but there's been a major shift of population from rural areas to metro areas. And there is a growing minority of population, so that by in the future, Georgia will expect to be a majority minority state in the next decade. So significant district changes will be required to account for these populations. And when you look at the red and blue colors, that has nothing to do with population or political affiliation. The darker blue shows that there's more population gain in that area, and the darker red means that there was more population lost. Next slide. So here, when we look at what is the fairest maps, these are all maps drawn with different criteria in mind. And if you look at what the data is given on there, think a little bit as I go through it, which map you think would be the fairest. So in our current congressional districts, we have 6 Democratic districts and 8 Republican districts. In this middle map, gerrymandering was done to favor the Republicans, and there we have 3 Democratic districts and 11 Republicans. In this map, gerrymandering was designed to favor Democrats, and we ended up with 8 Democratic districts and 6 Republicans. Down in this map, you see this map was designed to promote competitive elections. And in this map, we have 3 Democratic districts, 7 competitive districts, and 4 Republican. In this map, maximize majority minority districts, we would have 5 Democratic districts, 2 competitive districts, 7 Republican. And in this one, compact via county borders, we would have 3 Democratic districts, 2 competitive districts, and 9 Republican. So just think about this. You can list in the chat which one of these you think would be the fairest, because these drawing fair maps is very complex and difficult, and the best maps would have to consider those multiple criteria we outlined earlier, like competitiveness, being compact, being contiguous, and showing representation, and should not include partisanship. All right, so as we move into the next brief information we want to share with you, Mary Lou is going to talk about what is gerrymandering and why it's a problem.
Okay, what is gerrymandering? Why is it a problem? So take a look at this little picture in the corner. I want to share a little story, the way Gail Collins wrote it, about how gerrymandering came to be. She said, it's the age-old practice of trying to fix the boundaries of electoral districts to make sure your side gets as much advantage as possible. And it's named after a man named Elbridge Gerry. Gerry was the governor of Massachusetts in 1812. And in 1812, the legislature passed a bill that set the lines of the state districts to give his party a big boost and hopefully not elect Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry got elected somehow anyway, but they did a lot of creative map drawing, and the map they came up with, the critics thought it looked a lot like some kind of amphibian, and they named it the process gerrymandering. You know, the bill wasn't even Gary's idea. His son-in-law said he hated the idea. The legislature wanted to do it, and all he did was reluctantly sign the bill. But it's an excellent lesson in how careful you have to be if you are planning on becoming a historical figure. You can devote your life to creating a new nation, champion the Bill of Rights, get elected as James Madison's vice president, and in the end, the one thing people remember about you is a district shaped like a salamander. So gerrymandering is this manipulation of boundaries. And it can be done lots of ways, okay? There's racial gerrymandering, which was made illegal by the Voting Rights Act. And that involves favoring one race over another. And that was the gerrymander, that lovely, long, snaky green district that Karen showed you that was drawn. There's all kinds of ways to draw districts that aren't fair. Partisan gerrymandering, which is still legal, thanks to what the Supreme Court decided not to decide about it, favors one political party over the other. And that means that you try to make sure your people get elected as much as possible. There's another kind of gerrymandering, really interesting, which is called prison gerrymandering, which is also legal. And that means a state decides we're going to count all the prisoners where they're incarcerated in some rural county in Georgia rather than where they live, perhaps in the metro Atlanta area. And what that does is change the balance of how many votes there are available. And all of these prisoners who can't vote their votes weight, they're being counted in the census. Census weights the area in which they are staying and gives them a greater advantage. I just back a second. If you look at all these different shapes, they're all the old style gerrymandering used to make these crazy looking shapes that look like a gerrymander. But now gerrymanders gotten very sophisticated, and you can make things look really normal, but you can use the power of your technology to make a normal looking district that's actually very unfair. But let's just take a second, if you want, and do a little exercise. Okay, this is a guy named Bob Millman from Fair Districts, Pennsylvania, came up with this little exercise that helps us see how gerrymandering works. So, say this is a district, okay, and who lives in this district are pennies and dimes, 50 of each exactly, and they represent the two different parties in this area, okay? Now, people don't live in neat little rows like that, so we have to scramble them all up, all right? We're going to scramble them up and see what they look like. There we go. There's our hypothetical state or hypothetical district, and everybody's all scrambled up. And what are you going to do? Let's just say that the dimes are going to be the ones who get to draw the maps. What are the dimes going to do? Well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to pack all the pennies. They're going to make some little districts within this area that take all the pennies and put them together. Now that gives two very clear districts that are going to be won by the pennies, but it also uses up most of the pennies so that they can do the second little gerrymandering trick, and that is to crack the rest. They can take the rest of the pennies and divide them into districts where the majority are dimes. And so you can see that although our state is 50-50, look at the balance of what the districts happen. 8 districts were won by the dimes and 2 by the pennies with 50-50 district. Okay, but maybe it's not, maybe the dimes aren't in charge. Maybe the pennies are. Let's see what happens if the pennies draw the map. They do the same thing. They concentrate dimes in a couple of areas, and they scatter the rest of the dimes around the other area, and the result is 3 dime districts, 4 penny districts, and 3, this is the random district. The result here is 8 pennies and 2 dimes. But if it's random, you might get a more balanced, even just a random map will get a much more balanced configuration of districts. And this is an example of what it might look like. Okay. So that's sort of how it looks theoretically. Here's how it looks in practice. This is the kind of gerrymandering that happens in Georgia. And this is a mid-cycle gerrymander. Georgia has decided that we don't have to decide on districts just after the census. In fact, in Georgia, at every legislative session, they can make little tweaks to make things better for the people in power. And this is what happened right here in 2015. The Republicans adjusted House District 111 to protect an incumbent. And what they did was they took away the pink parts and they added in the green parts to this little district. And as a result, the incumbent won, even though he was the district was turning and it was in danger, but he won by 50%. And the next, he won again the next time in 2016 by 52%. However, by the special election, it was down to just a 742 vote majority. And finally, in 2018, the Democrats won that district. So let's just talk about what gerrymandering does, how it undermines our democracy, how it makes Lady Liberty cry. First of all, every vote doesn't count equally. A voter will say, my vote is wasted because the race was already won in the other party's primary or in my party's primary. There's no election, it all happens in the primary. It also discourages voter turnout. And the incumbents don't need to listen to all the constituents. They can say, I'm going to get elected in the primary because I know I have the majority there. And all I have to do is pay attention to the hardcore people in my party, the ones way far out in my party who vote in the primaries. And those are the ones I have to pay attention to. I don't have to listen to anybody else. And it leads to that extreme partisanship that we're having right now in Georgia, so that people aren't able to come together and compromise and make decisions together. Counties and municipalities are also split, making it harder for leaders to represent their districts. Now, the last question I want to talk about is why today? Why is it so important? And I think you've already gotten the message. This is a gerrymandering. I mean, this is a redistricting year. We don't want it to be a gerrymandering year. And all of these things contribute to make it so important. One of them is big data. Used to be you had to go get in a hotel room and get lots and lots of maps and play around with maps and try to figure out how you could get the district that was most favorable to you. Now we can have a program, a computer program, tell us all the information they need. Extreme partisanship has made it really hard for us right now. And this gerrymandering has shut down our governments by making us not able to cooperate with each other. And finally, of course, it is the year. This is the year we're redistricting, and it's really important that we need to be ready when that data is released to challenge and to find out and to make sure that things are done fairly for us. And now there's another question, and that's what you can do. And I'm turning it right back over to Karen. Still there, Karen?
Sorry. So when we look at what you can do and where you can start, we are asking for several things. You can do them by yourself, you can do them in a group, but there's something that everyone can do. If you look first, we're asking for 3 primary changes as we put all our voice for fair districts. First of all, we're asking that to make the process public and transparent. On April 19th, we sent a letter to Duncan, Ralston, and the committees, and we outlined very clearly, we're asking for request waiver of secrecy, 15 specific changes for public access. And this was signed by not only fair districts, but 20 other organizations. We want the commitment to meet independent, nonpartisan benchmarks for each district. And we want maps drawn based on community input. Communities can provide clear definitions, and we're asking the legislators respond to each or defined community, or think about that when they're drawing the maps. Next slide. So one thing we want you to remember is citizens make a difference. Now this is just, just always remember that citizens have power. And something happened in 2017, and a key lesson that we learned that we want you to remember. In this picture, we had some people who showed up and they were watching what the legislators were doing. And when they were there, the legislators had to change their minds and do the right things, even though initially I'm sure they didn't think all those people were going to show up, and they definitely didn't think those people were going to be watching what they were going to be doing. So, we have to be consciously on guard. We have to use our voices, and we have to let them know what we expect as citizens. We know that when we show up, like in this picture, the legislators were so worried about people showing up, they had police officers there for all of us really powerful young people here. But anyway, just remember that citizens have power and we have to use our voices and let them know that we're watching. Next slide. So there's 6 easy ways that you can help. You can educate yourself by going on this website, www.fairdistrictsgeorgia.org. You can get involved. You can sign up for actions alerts. You can sign up for the newsletters. You can take an action by contacting legislators. We have postcarding events, letters to the editor events. You can volunteer to work on one of our committees. You can invite us to speak to your group or in your community. You can donate, and we are encouraging you to attend one of our town halls. We have a town hall that's coming up this week. If you look carefully, we have a town hall coming up May 24th. There will be a link in the chat. And if you're interested in having a postcard party, there'll also be a link in there to contact Pam Woodley if you're interested in doing that. We are working, I'm sorry, next slide. We are working with the Princeton gerrymandering project, and we have been very, very excited. The Princeton gerrymandering project is an independent entity. The director of the project is a neuroscience professor, Dr. Sam Wong, and we're working with a team of mathematicians and analysts who are partnering with similar organizations in other states. And they really have worked with us and looking at the intersection of law, math, and political science. They've done a lot of analysis and put together some very helpful information that we will be sharing. Some I think we'll be sharing at the town hall that's coming up. But we'll have some additional data that will be very, very helpful to citizens to understand the impact of gerrymandering on our voting process in Georgia. So in the Princeton project, as you see outlined on this slide, they've been working with us to really research the 20-year history of gerrymandering, the big case for change, what happens in terms of the maps that are drawn by legislators and how it works out against benchmarks. And all of this information is going to be key when we go as citizens and be able to testify or respond to these maps that will be coming out. So in closing, next slide, I think the key thing to remember is gerrymandering may not be what you care about most, but it's what you need to care about first. It's not a right or left issue, it's a right or wrong issue. So thank you so much for giving us your attention. If you have questions in the chat, we will get back to you with some of those answers. And I think the last slide, again, it just has some information about how you can get in touch with us on Twitter, on the web, or on Facebook. So thank you so much.
I will put that in the chat in just a second. Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you all. And huge thanks to Fair Districts Georgia for doing this incredibly, incredibly important work. It is the work of the moment. And actually, before we leave entirely, Robin had a question a little ways back. Can you say something about what it means to maximize majority minority districts? Will one of you take that on? Mary Lou, you're muted. You're still muted. You're still muted. No, there you go.
Okay, this is a really tricky question, and we really encourage you to come to tomorrow night's town meeting because that's the topic. And we have some real big experts talking about it. But interestingly enough, this is one of the trickiest places because if you think about packing and cracking, if we put a lot of minority voters into a couple of districts, they're going to have those districts vote, but the power of the group is not going to be as powerful because they could have elected several representatives with that many votes. So what it's an interesting balance to make sure that there are majority districts, but that they don't waste a lot of votes by having so many more votes than they need to elect their representative. Does that make sense?
Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And I think that that's it for questions, but if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Mary Lou or Karen Davenport or Karen McCowan will respond. And huge encouragement to keep tracking Fair Districts Georgia. There are a lot of links in the chat, and they have a lot of events going on. And this feels like it's one of the basic understandings that we have to have this year. And let me just, before we kind of transition to this next piece, let me just also, if anybody has joined us and if this is your first Trebler meeting, if you would put your name and email address in the chat, that would be wonderful. We will be able to know who you are and add you to the email list and give a little shout out. So by way of transitioning to rank ordered voting, let me just say that that there are times that we are working very hard to get candidates elected. And there are times that we are working very hard to change and make more fair the fundamental structure of the election process in Georgia. Redistricting reform is one of those ways to make the fundamental structure more fair. And another way, which is emerging more and more, is rank ordered voting. So the next piece, and some of you might have heard about it, some of you might know a lot about it, some of you might not know anything about it. When Pat and I began to hear about rank ordered voting, we had to watch about 3 little YouTube videos before we understood it. So in the absence of making you do that, we have a couple of really wonderful presenters from an organization that is called Better Ballot Georgia. And we are very grateful for them for the work they're doing around rank ordered voting and for joining us to explain rank ordered voting to us and where it is now relative to Georgia. Bill Bozarth, welcome, welcome. Melinda Delisle, welcome, welcome. We are so happy to have you here. I'm going to turn this over to Bill, who is a long-time advocate for better voting, better government practices in Georgia. Bill, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Becky. It's great to be with you and see so many people that are dedicated to trying to make our democracy work better than it does. And as you alluded to, there are a number of areas rife for improvement. And your redistricting focus is great. I know some of the folks that are running the Fair District organization, and I actually interacted with some of you folks in the beginning. I also like to give a brief shout out to my good friend Pam Woodley, who I've known for a long time and have always admired her commitment to activism. She's the one that connected me to the organization here. So it's kind of like I'm meeting some old friends. I'm going to get off the screen quickly because we have a lot to say and a small amount of time to say it. Better Ballot Georgia sort of came into being in the third quarter of 2020. We had our first statewide meeting in November. We're about 6 months old. We've incorporated. We've established ourselves. We've got a staff of volunteers. And one of the things that we do with our volunteers is we provide people that can go out and talk about who we are and what we're trying to do. And so Melinda Delisle is one of those folks. I have never met Melinda in person because this all started during the time of COVID, as so many of you know. And Melinda has an advocacy background in a lot of areas. Right now, she's very, very much involved in trying to work on some of the challenges in pregnancy and pregnancy health. That is to sort of minimize the number of complications in pregnancies, minimize the number of births before term. And so that's one of the things she's working on now. And over the years, she's been involved in another number of other things, but we are delightful that she has given a lot of her energy to our efforts. And she's one of the people that is prepared now to give us a little rundown on what Better Ballot Georgia is and the issue that we have. So Melinda, I'm going to just turn it over to you and let them hear it.
All right, well, thank you. I'll just take a moment here and get this shared up. Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you all for having us here today. We are thrilled to be able to take an opportunity to explain just a little bit about instant runoff voting, also called ranked choice voting. And as Bill mentioned, we're here on behalf of Better Ballot Georgia, and we do have a pending 501c3 status, but it's not ready yet. So he did introduce me. I couldn't help but put in this picture. It's an opportunity that I had to go to the Capitol in Washington a few years back with Lamaze International and do some lobbying on behalf of maternal mortality. It was quite a day. So, I do want to mention that we are going to go through this relatively quickly. So if anybody has questions, we'll leave a few minutes at the end. Please pop those in the chat. Or if you want some more information and details that would take more than the time we have, please feel free to reach out. And I'll be happy to go ahead and email you some information or set up a time that we can talk. Right, so as we know, there are lots of problems with our current system of voting. Gerrymandering obviously is one of those big issues. There's a bunch of them here. Because of time, we're only going to get to go through a few. And there are even more problems with voting that are not listed on this here. And unfortunately, you know, we can only start where we can start, right? So one of the issues is the impact of plurality voting and vote splitting. Now, just a quick reminder that plurality voting means that whoever has the most votes wins, regardless of how many that is. If the most votes out of all the candidates is 20%, then that person wins. This causes a lot of problems, namely things like people go ahead and vote for their second or third or whatever choice, not who they really want, because they were trying to vote for who wins instead of voting for who they really think would do the best job. We also have an issue with getting qualified candidates, because if somebody thinks that they're not going to be able to win, they just don't even enter the race. And so that winds up being a real issue. And then we have resentment after the fact, because if we have, especially in the case of recent elections, somebody who didn't get a majority because they voted for somebody else, then everybody's mad because, well, these votes would have gone to that candidate, and that whole argument that we see repeated time and time again. This gets even worse the more candidates we have on the ballot, like we see with a lot of primaries and some of those crazy elections that we see on the Georgia ballots. Runoff cost is an issue. Just this last election for Fulton County alone, it cost $6 million to run the runoff. I don't know about you, but I can think of a whole lot of better places I would prefer to see that money going rather than to counting votes again, because we didn't get a clear majority the first time. Turnout is a really big issue with runoffs. This most recent election was a very unusual case in that we had a ton of turnout for the runoff. Usually a third to half or even more of the people that had voted the first time don't vote in the runoff election. This means that candidates are winning based more on who decides to show up than on whether or not they're qualified. And this problem is even worse when it comes to candidates and voters of color. They're more greatly impacted by declines in voter turnout. Campaign ad civility. It was at an all-time high, I think, in this most recent runoff. About 70% of the ads were negative. Some of those ads were running over 300 times a day. This impacts not only what's going on in our politics, but it also impacts mental health and other quality of life. So the good news is that a simple tweak in how we vote can make a big difference. It's not a cure-all, it's not going to cure everything, but it can make a big difference. Instant runoff voting, also called ranked choice voting, that's what you might hear used when it's talked about in places like Utah or Maine. Here in Georgia, we use instant runoff voting because we're already familiar with runoffs. So it makes a lot of sense to the public to use instant runoff voting. So what is it? Basically, it means that instead of just picking one candidate for each spot, you can choose the person you like best, the one you like second, the one you like third, indicate that on your ballot, and so on for as many choices as you want to rank. Just like you would do if you were telling people what your list of favorite foods is, your list of favorite wines, your list of favorite songs. It's a process we use every day. So it's not complicated, it's easy, and it's something we're consistently using. In the tallying, this is how it works. Initially, they would count up everybody's first choices. If somebody has a majority, awesome, we're done, just like a regular election we have now. If there's not a clear majority, then they go back and get rid of the candidate that has the lowest votes. And all of those voters, their second choice is counted. Then they count it up again, and that cycle continues until they have a clear majority winner. This is how it looks, or how it looked actually and played out in a 2018 election in Santa Fe, where you can see that over time they wound up with a majority. About a third of the time from the data so far, you wind up with a person who did not win the first round winning in the end, but most of the time it does wind up being rather similar to this. So what are some benefits? We have a lot of benefits to ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting. There are a lot of places that it's already used, so we have data that shows all of this. For today, we're just going to get to touch on a couple of them real briefly. One of the best effects is that we don't have to worry about spoiler effects. People can vote for the candidate they really want. And as long as they've ranked other candidates after that, even if that person doesn't win, their vote still counts. You can see in this particular election, over 10 people wound up being eliminated before they had a clear majority. And that means that everyone's still feeling like they get to have their say. Campaigns wind up being more civil. Candidates have to talk to not only their base of supporters and try to make sure that those people get to the polls, but they have to talk to a lot greater percentage of the public to try to be second, third, or even fourth place vote choice. Voters do use the rankings. They found that in Maine, close to 90% of people used and ranked more than one candidate. So people do understand it, they get it, they know how to use it, and they do use it. Now, one of the most interesting, and I think in some ways most important pieces, is that in areas that have instituted ranked choice voting, they have found that there's a greater percentage of elected officials are people of color than in those areas that did not adopt ranked choice voting. This holds similar to women, where the balance becomes more like the populations that they are serving instead of like the candidates that have tended to win historically. So using instant runoff voting, there are a lot of places in the country that already have it enacted. 26 states either allow or already are using ranked choice voting in elections. And it's been used in places around the world for over 100 years. So this is not a new concept, it's just new to us. In Georgia, SB 202 was recently passed and had a mention of instant runoff voting. No matter what you think about the rest of the bill, I know or the law, there's a lot of controversial issues there. It does mandate instant runoff voting for military and overseas voters. And that was done mostly to shorten the runoff period. But the great thing for us is that it gets us a trial run, even though it's something that's a situation that's different than it would be used with us because they have separate ballots. A wonderful way to test instant runoff voting would be for cities to be able to use it. But unfortunately, right now, that is not allowed according to the Georgia Code. We would have to get the Georgia legislature to pass a law allowing cities and other municipalities to use instant runoff voting if they wanted to. And cities are asking for this. The city of Atlanta and Johns Creek have both already passed resolutions requesting that the Georgia legislature look into this. And there are other cities that are talking about passing resolutions as well. So we only touched on a few, but there are a lot of benefits to instant runoff voting. It is not a panacea, it's not a cure-all. So you might be wondering, why do we want to care about something like instant runoff voting when there are so many other important reforms that are needed? And the fact is that instant runoff voting is one of those things that pretty much anybody you talk to goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so it's easy, it's approachable. It's something that pretty much anybody all across the political spectrum can agree to. And it starts making some of those other reforms more possible. So we would love to have your help. One of the simplest and easiest ways to help is you can just sign our petition. that will gather names, show that yes, there's a lot of people wanting this, and help you get some updates on how things are going with instant runoff voting. Even better, we'd love to have some help with you as a volunteer or a donor, even if it's just an hour or two a month. We can use you as a volunteer, and even just, $5 or $10 helps as a donation. At your workplace or organizations, you can use instant runoff voting in your elections. There are free tools that you can use to be able to use that. And if you know other organizations or important people that would like to know more or have a presentation like this, please connect us with them, and we would be happy to help them out. So if you have any questions, we've got a few minutes left. We can answer a couple of questions, and other questions in the chat, we can follow up with you later. All right, so are there any, I can't see the chat right now, so are there any questions?
I am not seeing any yet, but if anybody has any, you're welcome to write them in there right now. Let's just give folks another minute here to see if there are any that show up.
I know it's a lot of information to get through relatively quickly, but it's got so many benefits. It was hard to leave any of them out.
So Melinda, here's a question. And actually, if you would stop screen share, maybe that would be easiest.
Sure.
Great. Here's a question from Martha Laird. Do voters know who, quote, won each round?
In the places where it's been implemented, there is first of all, we have the Dominion voting system in Georgia. So one of the prerequisites for this working is, will the vendor of the election equipment support this? And the answer is yes, it does. We were able to see an example in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they use ranked choice voting, and they have Dominion systems running as well. And they run a little program, and they show exactly, like you saw in some of Melinda's examples, how it was resolved by rewarding the votes of the last place finisher and so forth until it happens. So you come out with a little spreadsheet that shows all of that. So yes, everyone will totally understand how the winner was arrived at.
That's great. And a question that I would ask either for Bill or Melinda is, I thought it was really interesting, the piece of data that was about that with ranked ordered voting, it was a more accurate reflection of gender balance and racial balance. Can you just speak to that? Why does that work that way?
Well, the data that we are seeing on it in the cities where they've tracked it so far is that because people are willing to vote for who they really want, instead of just looking at who do I think can beat the other guy, they're voting for those people who they're more willing to vote for women. They're more willing to vote for people of color, because historically speaking, it's an unfortunate thing, but in this country, usually we have white male elected officials. And so when we only have this duality, we don't have that ability to rank, people are afraid to vote for women and people of color unless they're really feeling compelled.
Great, thank you. And there's a question from Janet Grant. How often is there a winner that is not the winner of the plurality?
So the data I've seen on that is about a third of the time, about 30% to just a little bit less. They're still gathering a lot of data on that, but it would be cool, in my opinion, if it was like a large percentage of the time, but it does seem to make an impact, at least a noticeable amount.
Yeah, you would expect that the first place finisher would usually be the favorite, and that other people might favor them, but it isn't always the case. And that was one of the beauties of it, is if you came in second or third, you might end up winning when you didn't have the plurality in the first round. I like that. I hope other people would like it as well. I think the guy who was in first place but then lost would not like it, and that's been the case in a few times we've covered. One of the things that Melinda hit on was the number of people that don't participate in the second round. She gave a chart that showed it generally that, sometime between 30 and 50% of the people that voted the first time don't bother to come back. There was one example in 2018 when our Secretary of State won, and he beat John Barrow. Rassensberger beat him in a runoff in 2018. And the number of people who voted the second time around for that office was 32% of the people who voted the first time. And when you consider only about 55% of the registered voters vote in the first place, and think about what you're doing, you're talking about, 20% of the electorate is making the decision. And instant runoff voting doesn't cure that. It doesn't make people vote in the first place, but it certainly takes care of the fall off that occurs in most runoffs.
Great. And two more questions. I know Mary Lou has a question, and let me ask Martha Laird's question first, which is really about clarification. You do not, so she's asking, do you go to the polls for each round?
No,
Right.
The ballot example that Melinda showed, at the time you cast your initial vote, you cast your second and third and fourth choices if there's that many candidates. You don't have to cast a second choice. A lot of people, that's one of the things that makes it hard to sell. People are confused because it's new, and you can tell the voter, if you don't want to do it, you just vote the way you always did. There's a picture there that shows how it would be on the first ballot. You did not have to come back. You do it when you cast your initial ballot.
Great. And let's do one last question. Mary Lou, do you want to just ask your question?
Actually, I was just going to repeat Martha's question because I didn't understand the answer. It sounds like the machine does all the calculations and you don't find out until the winter. You don't hear who wins each round. Is that correct?
Oh, no, it would be a very quick calculation, and you would only go to that calculation if somebody didn't get a majority on the first round. So,
But you wouldn't hear about it. It would all be done before you ever got the results of the election. Is that correct? I mean, as a voter.
well, what I see, how I see it playing out, if you have electronic reconciliation of this, is on the night of the election, when all the votes are counted, you would see if anybody had a majority, and if they didn't, the calculation would be done immediately, and you would know that night who the winner was.
So you'd watch it live. That's cool.
Well, I don't know how it plays out. We haven't had enough examples to kind of answer that, but that's the way I envision it.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice. And we're going to need to stop and shift, but Melinda or Bill, there are a few questions in the chat. Would you guys mind just kind of sticking around and answering those questions in the chat if you don't mind? That would be wonderful. Thank you, because
Certainly.
they're important. They're important questions.
We
And
can't
yeah,
spend the whole time, Becky. We will answer them in the chat. We'll make sure.
beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And here's what we're actually, yeah, that was, thank you, Mary Lou. Yes, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Rank ordered voting is going to be a really, really big deal in this country. It feels like the movement is gaining momentum. It is more fair. It is less expensive. So it's really important to understand it. And again, it took us a little while to kind of wrap our heads around it. So if we need to have these folks back, we hope that they will come back and join us. And what we'll be doing subsequent to the meeting is sending out some of the links. Some of the links that that these folks have had in there, to the petition and where to sign up. So don't worry if you don't have those, we will send them out. And what we're going to do next is we're going to do some breakouts next. And they're going to be really simple breakouts, and they are not going to be, Patty Brawley used to call our breakouts the Hall of Shame breakouts, because they're very often about what you've been doing. And that is not these. These are just, it has been a long time since we've been in person together, and it would be nice to connect kind of breakouts. So these are no pressure breakouts. And the framing question for this breakout, for these breakouts, are what is on your heart or mind? And we're going to have 3 people. We're going to break out roughly 3 people at a time. If you would just give me a little minute. So much. It's always a tremendous relief to get everybody back afterwards. And here would be this would be wonderful, is if you would put in the chat, if you would just put in the chat something that you heard in the breakout of what is on the heart and mind of somebody that you were with, or even what's on your own heart and mind, just so we can come together a little bit after that. I'm going to give folks a minute to type it in. So Tara, you are so welcome. I was also missing connection with our beloved group. Loved a chance. So Mary Lou, loved a chance to get to know Barbara and Stephanie. It was nice to connect with others. Paula, concern for those in India. God, yes. Martha, important to keep ourselves open to the pain of the world and to the joy and courage in the world. Elizabeth Cohen, deep concern to create infrastructural change. Sandra, Bill 202. Oh, and many who believe it's the right thing to do. Goodness. Lou Booth, fatigue of negative politics. Pam Woodley, the moods veering back and forth between hope and fear. Absolutely. Glenda, glad to be involved with Troublers. We are so happy to have you. Pat, wonderful to meet Glenda, who moved here from Pensacola. Glenda, welcome, welcome. And Barbara, good to know others who are feeling the same. And Linda Gooding, we are all a little exhausted with politics and enjoying the beautiful spring. And Karen Davenport, great to connect. Concerns about municipal elections, about people who believe this misinformation. Jane, the emotional roller coaster with hopefulness and fearfulness. Pam Wishay, good connection with others, concerned about the number of people who seemingly ignore truths. Yes. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. I'm always so grateful for the people who actually stay on for breakouts. We tried to put this in the middle of it, if anybody noticed, the middle of the meeting, so we wouldn't lose folks along the way. And I would now like to introduce our next guest. And I want to say something about Marlin Tillman. I think we are incredibly lucky to have her with us. She is a parent, a community activist, and the co-founder of Gwinnett Stop, which stands for Gwinnett Stop the School to Prison Pipeline, which she co-founded after realizing that her own son was being targeted in this process. And they focus on increasing public awareness and also on promoting policy changes which they hope will lead to the dismantling of the school to prison pipeline. She's a past recipient of Georgia ACLU's Civil Liberties Award for community activism. And one thing we were talking about when she just came into when she joined a few minutes ago was that while STOP started in Gwinnett, they have had so much demand from other counties that, for instance, they're now doing training in South DeKalb. And we were connected with Marlin through our own wonderful troubler, PJ Lemuel, who was involved in the parent training in South DeKalb. So great gratitude to PJ for connecting us. And Marlin, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to put myself on mute and turn this over to you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to see all your faces. You know what? Let me put my glasses on so I really do see them well. It's great to see all of your faces. And thank you so much for having me. I'm going to just kind of jump right into the presentation. If we could just give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen. And is everyone okay with seeing the screen? Good. Okay. So as you heard, I am Marlin Tillman, the Executive Director and co-founder of the Gwinnett Parent Coalition to Dismantle the School to Prison Pipeline, Gwinnett Stop for short, because that's a mouthful. And we organize parents, students, community members around just what the name says. And so why is it not doing my go forward? Okay, so give me just a sec. I'm gonna see why it is not being nice to me. Okay, here we go. And so this is our work. Our work falls into two buckets: public education and advocacy policy change. And we do that work at the local level, the state level, and the national level. With our statewide work, we advocate, well, locally, of course, we're in Gwinnett County advocating for and against policies that impact school to prison pipeline. At the state level, we're doing the same thing, and we work with other statewide organizations. At the national level, we're part of several national networks that help facilitate this work. Under our public education, our workshops, presentations like I'm doing now, our parent and youth leadership institutes. We have some specialized workshops that we do around student discipline and student codes of conduct, but we also do workshops around federal education law and state education laws as well. On our advocacy policy change, I'm very proud of the work that we've done on that level. We've impacted policies at the national level as well as the state level. We were responsible for getting school climate as part of we were part of getting student discipline, as part of the school climate indicator for the state of Georgia in the report card. We also are responsible for reducing the amount of disciplinary infractions in Gwinnett County that could get a student a referral to the SRO by 33%. So we're very proud of our work. There are lots of other things I can go into, but I won't. And so when you think about what is the school to prison pipeline, when you hear that, if you could just drop in the chat your thoughts on what is the school to prison pipeline, what do you think it is? And I'm watching chat to see if anybody's putting things in. I don't see anything. Infractions that get jail time, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. A child or teen does something that's turning, yeah. Too many young people. Wow, I must be here with the A students. That's great. That's great. So let's see what the video says about school to prison pipeline.
The school to prison pipeline. It's a term that describes how American kids get pushed out of public schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. Basically, harsh zero-tolerance policies in schools have led to more suspensions, expulsions, and even in-school arrests. Getting suspended or expelled means more time away from school, and it doesn't take an honor student to figure out that's bad news. In fact, expelled and suspended students are more likely to get held back a grade, end up in juvie, or just drop out altogether. And dropping out of high school makes you 3 times more likely to get arrested. Back in school, forget about hallway monitors.
Oh.
Students these days often have to deal with school police. Minor offenses that might have landed you in the principal's office back in the day can now actually lead to your arrest. Students of color and those with disabilities are disproportionately affected. Black students get expelled 3 times more than their white classmates, while a student with a disability is 2 times more likely to get an out-of-school suspension than everyone else. And it's not because these kids are just bad apples. The Justice Department found that Black students got harsher punishments than their white peers for doing the same things. So maybe it's time our education system got schooled?
So the recharacterization of student behavior, that is exactly how a lot of this happens. And I saw that in the chat as well. So when you start writing things up at pushing and shoving, you have police present, so you can see a crime now, right? So it's battery. Swiping headphones becomes theft and robbery. And just think it moves up a level because of the headphones and devices are very expensive items now. So they're over that $500 mark, which kicks students into a whole nother level for stuff that it could be the joke, it could be intentional, but if you get the property back, the students are still charged criminally. Talking back becomes disorderly conduct. That's a huge one. That's a subjective thing. And many students get arrested as well as disciplined for disorderly conduct. And so that could be for anything. If you curse out the teacher, that's that. If you just don't follow directions, it could be that too. And a lot of systems have eliminated zero tolerance policy, which the video talked about, but they haven't eliminated zero tolerance practices. And so the policy's written or not, but how we discipline a particular behavior becomes, this is what we do. And since it's a practice, it's not written, and it's harder to push back against those because you have to actually see it and find it as opposed to seeing it in data. And just one out of school suspension in 9th grade doubles a student's risk of dropping out. So who wants to go to a school that looks like this? Many schools don't have metal detectors. However, what happens to that student when they pass through those doors is the same. In the Gwinnett Disciplinary Alternative Schools, they do have a metal detector. And when the kids can only have, here we go, see-through backpacks. They're only allowed minimal items to be brought in instead of backpacks. They don't have books, so there's no transporting books in and out. When they come in, they have to go through shaking out their clothes and standing at the metal detectors, arms outstretched, and be wanded on top of that. Now, if that doesn't teach you how to go to jail, I don't know what does. And then the dismissal is really visiting time at the jail. So they line the children up in the hallway at the door. A staff member goes outside to the car riders line, collects up the names on the clipboard of who's there for which student, and then they use their walkie-talkie and radio into the building and call out the student one at a time in the order that the cars are lined up. If that isn't visiting time at the jail, I don't know what is. That is teaching our children how to go to jail. Many Georgia schools have school resource officers, and are our students really safe with them? I mean, everyone's familiar with this incident, I'm sure. Probably. This was the young lady who was thrown out of her chair for the mere violation of not putting her cell phone away. She was brutalized for not putting a cell phone away. And so that whole officer-friendly thing, yeah, that's a myth. Nationally, SRO programs began in the 1950s and gained traction in the 90s in response to various school shootings. Actually, Columbine is what kicked it off, which was a wealthy white suburban school district. However, police got sent into urban, mostly people of color schools. And that was out of balance. In Georgia, in 1982, the state legislature gave school boards the authority to establish school-based law enforcement officers. And in the state of Georgia, and you will find the definitions are different around the country, and each state governs what happens with police in schools or not. They may hand off all authority. In Georgia, a school resource officer, that title means they are a sworn law enforcement officer. Their beat is the school. They have arrest powers, they have investigation powers. They can do anything that an officer on the street can do. That is what they have. They also must go through be post-certified. So they are truly, they can really go from being on the street to being in the schools if the school system hires them as such. Or if they have a contract with the local police department to provide a school resource officer. In Gwinnett County Schools, they do not hire school resource officers unless they have at least 5 years on the street. And 5 years on the street and then coming into a school building, the training they get to help them transition is that you can't tase the kids in the same fashion that you would if you were on the street. That's their training, which is problematic. So, and here's it. And according to data from the Georgia police officers, the post-certified training, 12% of school resource officers working in the state school police departments right now have been forced out of previous jobs or terminated or investigated for reasons that included chronically poor performance, sexual misconduct, lying to superiors, and inappropriate use of force. Gwinnett County Public Schools spends $10.4 million on police. That's money that can be reinvested in alternative discipline practices and supports like restorative practices and mental health counselors, as well as social workers, things that really support a student. And oftentimes you'll hear people say, well, they can mentor the kids. That's not their job. They are, understand in Georgia, they are sworn police officers, and you cannot overcome that dual role of SROs serving as both staff, school staff, and police. They are by duty sworn to report things. So if a child confides to them, whatever they find that's criminal, they are by duty sworn. And so which hat do they put on when that happens, right? Are they now school staff or are they putting on the police hat? And you don't know that. And if they're there for counseling, they're not trained for counseling. And that's why you have counselors who are trained for that. They're not social workers. Understand, they are law enforcement officers. Okay, and that's what their job is. And so when we talk about they're there to make the kids safe, or they're there in case of in case of a school shooting, that happens such a minuscule amount of times. And in Gwinnett, it's never happened. So we're spending $10.4 million for things that don't happen. When you look at the amount of incidents that happen that truly are violent types of incidents in schools, it is about, the last time I looked at the Georgia data, and I haven't looked at the most recent one that was pre-COVID, because COVID data is a little wonky. It was less than 1%. Violent incidents happen less than 1% across our state. Why are we supporting this? Why are we paying for things that are proven not to work? This doesn't make children feel safer. And for some students, it's a lot of trauma, particularly for Black and Indigenous people of color. That's a lot of trauma when we walk in and see an officer there. Okay, so my forward is not working well. And so just to show you what some data looks like, this is one of our rural counties, right? And here you can see what disciplinary consequences look like. I got this off of the Georgia, the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And so for Polk County, as you can see, well, you don't have their population. They're roughly about 8,000 students, right? And then you look at their discipline for students with a disability versus students without. And you heard in the video that they're impacted. And I forgot to run by in the definition, the formal definition. It is school to prison pipeline is the recharacterization and moving children out of recharacterization of behaviors, moving children out of their regular school environment into alternative environments, as well as the juvenile justice system. It primarily impacts students of color, particularly Black students are at the highest rate, students with disabilities, students from low income background, and that's when we get that class piece in there. So it does impact white students. When I did a presentation for Polk County and pulled up their community data to show them that these numbers fit right alongside the wealth in their community, you know. So low income students and males. And if you hit every one of those, you are at the highest risk of being in the school to prison pipeline. So when we look at Polk County, students with disabilities are, I think they were less than 10%. But you see how disproportionate discipline is happening for students with a disability. They are also at the highest risk. Look at physical restraints, corporal punishment. Corporal punishment in Georgia is legal. So many of the metro Atlanta districts do not use it. There are some districts in this state who have a policy of telling the parents, if you sign off that we can beat your children, then we won't suspend them out of school. So that's quite a choice, right? And so why are students with disabilities at a higher rate? Othering. Unfortunately, we have a bad habit of othering people, and so they get othered too. Behaviors that may fall within their disability are also disciplined, which is against their IEP, but it does happen all too often. Do I have them in there twice? I do. So let's go into their performance. And this is why it matters. So you saw that the out of balance discipline. This is why it matters. What I found very interesting about Polk is that 8th grade, they only have 41% of their 8th grade students reading at or above grade level. But when you go into what their graduation rate, they sure caught those kids up, huh? No, they got passed on. And look at the 3rd grade number. 3rd grade is very important. It is the time that students are moving from reading to learn, from learning to read to reading to learn. And if they don't make that transition, it's not going to be good for them. And give me just one sec. I'm having a hard time with it moving forward. It just doesn't like me. Okay. Then I pulled up a DeKalb County, and as you can see, their racial makeup is definitely different. However, there's a whole lot of discipline going on in DeKalb County. And this is percentage of disciplinary incidents by race. And as you can see, and I didn't bring up the special ed one, I'm sorry. Special education is disproportionate as well. You will find that happens in, I don't know any school district offhand that I could tell you that it isn't. And that's unfortunate because we're talking about the students that need the most are getting the least. Then again, why it matters. The academic growth is great. They had a lot of room to grow. Again, look at that 8th grade reading at or above grade level. And then look at the graduation rate. Are they really ready. And then you look at 50% of the graduates are college and career ready. There's some dashboards where you can pull up where the students are 5 years after graduation. I would love to tell you that's some good news, but it's not. This is the impact of it all. This is really, really why it matters. Students are more likely to drop out of school if they've even had one suspension from school, and one arrest just balloons that by 10 times. One of the things I love to point out is the harder to apply for college. One of the things the schools will tell you is when you're doing that whole counsel, oh, don't worry, your child got suspended. It won't go anywhere. It stays with the school system. It's fine. You fill out that application, the first thing they ask you is to send off a counselor recommendation, right? You ever read that? The counselor recommendation says, tell us all of the discipline that the student has been involved in. It does matter. It does matter. And that goes on all the time. So you think you're safe, you think it's okay, I'll leave it alone. When students aren't in school, they're not learning, right? We call it lost learning, days of lost instruction. And we do count up the days. Georgia students have lost over 1 million days of lost instruction. And when you start breaking it down by county, it doesn't get much better. It's usually 3 to 4 times. And when I did Gwinnett's, it turned out to be something like 8 years worth of education years that they're losing in 1 year of suspension and expulsion. We build up the distrust between students and schools. That's not what we need, right? That's counterintuitive. The stigma and embarrassment of being one of those students, the it student that the school focuses on, the teacher focuses on, is just not a good thing for students, and they're not going to stick around. They're not going to be engaged. They're going to just disengage. One of our co-chairs made the comment about what her daughter told us. She said, well, I don't try anymore. Why should I? You all are only going to punish me. I go to school, I get punished. I could be home and get punished. What's the point? I don't do anything anyway. So I'm gonna just keep doing whatever I want to do. I get the same results. And so, talk about out of the mouths of babes. Why should they try? And as she said, she has a hard time making friends because the kids all look at her like she's that kid. Turns out she had a reading disability, so she was dyslexic, and it impacted how she was processing information. And kids tease other kids, and it just goes on. And so she felt like, well, now I'm getting punished and I don't know what's going on here anyway, and I'm gonna act out because I don't know what's going on and nobody's helping me. And she just kept moving it on. Okay, I'm gonna attempt to see if I can get it to go. So some strategies to interrupt the school to prison pipeline. One is through policy, of course. As I mentioned, we're part of some national organizations, one of which that we work with a lot is the National Dignity in Schools Campaign, a coalition of over 125 organizations around the state who are mostly parent or student-led organizations, as well as research and legal advocates. And so the model code is model policies for schools and districts to be able to adopt. I was part of the development of this. I love the model code. So you can actually pick it up, lift the language, and drop it in for school policies at your local school district level, at your state district level. Some of these policies are now embedded in legislation that's been introduced at the federal level. One of the things that we learned early on is that, with all of the local control, it's harder to get a handle and make systemic change. And if your district has dug in their heels, what do? we go above their heads. So that's how we started working at the state level. And then we said, hey, wait a minute, there's a federal level. And if the feds say it, they want that federal money. So they'll do whatever they say. And then we started impacting the grants that they get out of the feds. You know, so for them to get said grant, it has certain metrics attached to it. And so if you have to have positive school discipline policies, well, here we go. You're going to have to need some. Use the model code. If you're doing any advocacy work, it is research-based. It was put together with a lot of folks around the table, and it included, like I said, legal advocates. Strongly encourage you to check it out. It is based on the human rights principle. It's organized into 5 chapters: education, participation, dignity, freedom from discrimination, and of course, data, because you can't have accountability without data. And if you ways to use the model code, you can use it as a comparison. You can, like I said, lift up some of the recommendations out of there and use that language. It was used by a couple of the state senators here in Georgia when they wanted to start implementing some positive school discipline into state law. They used our model code. I made sure they had it so that they could use it. And then you can cherry pick what you need and use it along the way. It's just a list of resources, which I will share these slides so that you all can get it and click on the links. Of course, you know, and these are various organizations that we also work with, either through Dignity in Schools or through other networks. But they are wholly focused on looking at school to prison pipeline, looking at the issue around policing in schools, and how do we move away from that and into things that are research-based and what works for students. And this is how you contact us. And I'm just having a hard time moving on here. And then here we go. I think I'm over probably.
Well, Marlin, that was extraordinary. And I would like the most important question, I think, that is in the chat right now. This is really, yes, fabulous. That was an extraordinary presentation. And I think the most important question is from Gail Nelson, which is, how can we help? This is an issue that is close to my heart. So if folks are interested in really putting some shoe leather into this or some help into this, how can they do that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we convene policy tables all the time. Our policy is not formed necessarily by just those who live in the ivory tower and work in that silo. Our policies get formed by community members, from parents, from students. Anything that we do is done from that. We convene policy tables. It would be great to join in. We also run things around the community for people to give us feedback. That is so important, because if you weren't there when we were writing it, you need to be there saying, no, change that, you know, or add this, or can you say that a little different? So joining in that. On our website, we do have a contact us form where you can list some things that we are volunteer powered. I am part of the 1.5 paid staff members. So we are truly volunteer powered. So please sign up to volunteer with us. We have to do lots of data crunching to get to some of the things we do and how we put things together. We also do a lot of research. That's always a needed item. If you ever want to join our Leadership Institute, is Parent Leadership Institute, but it truly is open to the community. This year is being done as everything is online, which has been very challenging. Hopefully PJ hasn't held it against us too much. But that's another way to get involved. When we do actions, we get involved in legislative work during the session. If we do some action call outs to ask you to call in or show up or send a letter, that's another easy way to do it. But if you like policy research, data analysis, helping us put together the information we go forward with, and then of course, showing up in meetings, being informed beforehand, and then showing up in meetings to be able to talk to these policymakers, to tell them what we need as a community, right? Where do we want to go? What do we see for our future? And for those of us who don't have children in the school, I'm going to share something that one of my PTA friends said, and I don't have children in the school anymore either. You will care if that child learned to read. When you're in the nursing home and they have 2 bottles of medicines in their hand and they're deciding which one is yours and how much do you get.
Yeah, that's right.
And that will definitely
Yes.
tell you whether you really should care, whether you have kids or not. You will be impacted by everyone in your community who went to your school, to your public schools. And that impacts all across the board in so many ways.
That's fantastic, Marlin. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if folks are interested in working in any way on this particular issue, if you would put your name and if you would put your name in the chat. And Marlin, what we might do is use PJ as our conduit with you. Does that sound okay? And if you would then, and we will send out the PowerPoint slides that Marlin used. And if you want to be in that loop, we put your name in the chat and we will make those connections. And Marlin, can we just give a big round of applause for that work? And Marlin, thank you so much. Thank you for that important work that you're doing. And thank you for sharing it with us. Huge, huge, huge gratitude. And I know there are probably a few more questions. If Marlin, if you have time to look at the chat to answer them, that's fine. Otherwise, we will circle back afterwards. And again, I want to just reiterate that PJ is engaged in this work in South DeKalb, and so if there are a few folks who want to gather with her and we can make the connection in that way. But huge gratitude, Marlin.
I do have time if you all are okay with me picking some out, or there are things that you want me to.
You know, unfortunately, we probably can't do it out loud, just because we are going to run about 10 minutes over. But thank you. Thank you. Hugely important work. We will send the slides and we will do a follow-up. And let me transition a little bit. Let me just do a heads up to those of you is we are probably going to run about 10 minutes over, 5 to 10 minutes over. I hope you can hang in. What we wanted to do is do just a little bit about some of the areas of troubler work currently underway and some important updates. We are not going to be doing updates about every area of troubler work. And to those folks who are doing updates, if you can at all keep it to 1 or 2 minutes, we would be so grateful. I'm going to just, so we can see people's faces, I'm going to pull this off and just track it. Robin, would you do a little update about criminal justice reform?
Yes, I just wanted to share good news. So Senate Bill 105, which is a probation reform bill, actually passed and was signed by the governor. It is retroactive. So Georgia is the leader in the country of number of people on probation and how long they're on probation. This sets objective criteria that allows people to end probation after 3 years. And so just a bit of good news. Just want to let you all know.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nicoletta, would you do the little bit of update about immigration reform?
Yes, and I was going to say a few things, but I'm going to cut it short. So I also just want to share the good news, very good news, that the Irwin County Detention Center in Osceola, Georgia is going to be shut down. As some of you may, remember, this is the facility where detained women were sterilized without their full and informed consent. Irwin is now under federal investigation because of this, because of human rights violations. So ICE has been instructed by the DHS to immediately terminate the contract that it has with Irwin, which means ICE, Irwin contracts with ICE to manage all the daily operations, I should say business, of detaining immigrants. So this is going to end. We don't know how quick this is going to be done, but at least it's something. You know, it's a first step that took many, many years of work by Georgia-based organizations like Project South, GLAR, Georgia Detention Watch, South Georgia Immigrant Support Network, and many others. We don't know yet if the women remaining at Irwin are going to be transferred or released. We hope released, but they could be transferred to Stewart, which used to be an all-men facility, but unfortunately it has opened a unit for women. So what we do as activists does matter. So some of you are already volunteering for Casa Alterna. You know that Casa Alterna meets folks that have been released at the Atlanta airport and helps them navigate the airport, get flights, etc. If you would like to volunteer, please put your name in the chat with the word Casa. You don't have to be bilingual. Also, Refugio, and this is because they need more volunteers, because as people are starting to travel again and the summer months approach, they're going to need more people. The same is true for El Refugio. They need more volunteers, or will need more volunteers for the hotline, which receives calls from immigrants that are detained at Stewart, their families, or the media, or donors. If you would like, you do have to be bilingual though, English, Spanish. If you're interested in manning the hotline, please put your name in the chat with the word hotline. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoleta. Such great news about Irwin. Thank God. Pat, would you say something about the Deborah Gonzalez event?
There we go. As you know, we've worked really hard to help Deborah Gonzalez get elected as the district attorney for the Athens-Oconee area. And when she, the first day she was in office, she issued her day one memo, which details what she's going to be doing to bring about changes in how criminal justice is done in that area. And I encourage you to read it. It's a fascinating document about what needs to be done and how changes that need to take place there. If you'd like to see it, I'll put your name in chat and say day one memo, and I'll send you a link to it. What we're doing now is follow up with her to see how we can help her achieve those goals. And we're going to have an event on June the 16th from 7 to 8. Where Deborah will be speaking and some others. It's going to be a chance for us all to find out what district attorney office, what that reform looks like as it's happening, what changes are taking place. I understand that she's replaced a lot of the attorneys in that office because they didn't want to do it her way. So she said, okay, find another job. And she's been able to get attorneys who are on board with the changes she wants to make. So what we want to have is something where in the program, what does that kind of reform look like as it starts happening? And one of the things that Deborah is doing is that she wants to have more connections with the community so that people who have drug problem, addiction problems, or mental health problems, or kids who get in trouble at school, they settle it in the community. They don't let it get criminalized so that people become part of the criminal justice system. And she created a fund called Justice is on the Agenda. And she'll be explaining that to us and how that fund is able to fund things in the local community that bring about the changes that she's working for and that we're supporting. So June the 16th, that evening, going to be really exciting to celebrate with Deborah and to see what she's doing and what we can do to help her as she goes forward.
Great. Wonderful. Pat, thank you. Martha, would you say something about the diversity steering group?
Yes, I was realizing that it was a year ago now when George Floyd was murdered that we started our effort in building our lives and necessary trouble as a more inclusive enterprise, I guess you'd say. We've had many efforts, and I mean, many different aspects of that. And one of them most recently has been this little group that we're now calling ourselves the Inclusive Community Team. And the effort there is to support and encourage ways that all of us can learn and engage in being a diverse community. So we have events, activities are on a Google Drive that you can access through the update, and we'll be sure it's in every update, the link, so that you can go there and just find some things that you could do online, you could do in person, to learn about and engage in this inclusive community that we are part of. And I will put in the chat right now my email address. And if you have any events or activities that we should put in there, let me know.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Martha, thank you so much.
Yes.
And also, as we will be sending in the follow-up to this meeting, and thank you for the reminder, we will put that link in every update. And Michelle Casper, who is saving my life with helping on these updates. Anyway, maybe we'll remember to put that link in all of them. That's
Great.
Tremendous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I was going to do a little bit of recruiting related to special elections and municipals and the candidate directory. And I think what we'll do is leave those for next time in the interest of time. Pam Woodley, is there any of that recruitment that we need to do today rather than waiting for next time?
No, Becky, that's fine.
Okay, great. And let me say, just in advance of next time with whatever else we do, we're also going to be doing a little bit more about what used to be called the voter guide, which is now called the candidate directory. Really exciting things going on with that. We are hoping to hear from PJ Lemuel about her piece of the school to pipeline work that she's been doing. We are very much hoping that Judy Jones will be back with us and talking about a personal effort that a nonprofit that she has been spearheading in the last several years. So in addition to whatever else we do, we'll be doing some of that work as well. I also, before we go on to this next little piece, I just want to give a lot of gratitude. There has been a lot of spreading out of responsibility in the last month, like Michelle helping with the updates. A couple of other folks have been helping with updates in other capacities. Pam Woodley has been just being a champion about the candidate directory. Pam Wishay is coming on to help us structure some of the meetings. I am enormously, personally, tremendously grateful for that. Thank you so much. It feels like it's a lot of this is becoming more spread out, and gratitude to the folks who are helping carry those pieces. And I would like to pass this on to Michelle Truxillo, who is going to help bring us home. Michelle, can we turn this over to you?
Yes. Before I start singing tonight, I want to say something about what I'm going to be doing. It's become increasingly important in recent years because white culture has appropriated music from a number of other cultures, not just music, but certainly music, to give credit to the origin of the music that I do, and a lot of other people are doing this too. The song, with that in mind, the song I want to offer today is one of Becky's favorites, and it's one of mine, an oldie but goodie. Michael rowed the boat ashore, which is an African-American spiritual first noted during the early years of the Civil War, though most likely it's much older than that. Michael is probably the Archangel Michael, who, it's believed, helps ferry the souls of the dead to heaven across the River Jordan. It's a song to me of transition from life to death to new life. So here it is. Michael rowed the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Michael rowed the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Sister, help to trim the sail. Hallelujah. Sister, help to trim the sail. Hallelujah. The river Jordan is chilly and cold. Hallelujah. It chills the body but not the soul. Hallelujah. The river is deep, the river is wide. Hallelujah. Milk and honey on the other side. Hallelujah. Michael rowed the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Michael rowed the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Thank you.
Can we just unmute ourselves and thank Michelle for that beautiful, beautiful gift?
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank
you, Michelle.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
And a reminder to all of us that when this stops, when this work stops being about love and about connection, then we all go home. Right?
Right.